there's a lot of roles in the information security space, and one that's incredibly mysterious is the DevSecOps engineer. This role has only recently come on the scene in the last couple of years, but what is it actually? In this video, we're going to be talking with Ashish Rajan, an expert in the space, about what the role is, what skills do you need to do it, what's great about it, what's not great about it, and what you can do to get that job. Coming up. Hey everybody, thanks for coming back. So this is a harken back to those videos that we did where it was a very specific job in the field, and we're going to go through and talk about it. Now we have ones on the channel for SOC analyst, for social engineer, pen tester, etc. A lot of these kind of major roles that most of us are familiar with, but I don't have one for DevSecOps engineer. And frankly, this job is kind of coming out of left field. There's not a lot of knowledge about it. And, you might have some assumptions, but they could be wrong. It is tied to cloud type work, but what is it really? And I'm so excited to be able to talk to an expert, Ashish Rajan, today and bring that information to you. Now, really quick, if you're new here, my name's Jerry Ozier. This is Simply Cyber, the YouTube channel designed to help you make and take a cybersecurity career further, faster. And sometimes we do technical labs on the channel, and sometimes we talk to experts like Ashish. So if that's interesting to you, have a look around. We got 150 videos in the catalog. There's got to be something there that resonates with you. All right, let's get into the interview with Ashish. Ashish, let's start right at the beginning. Please, can you define what it is that a DevSecOps engineer actually does?
Yeah, I can totally do that. So maybe before I can peel off the layers, it's worthwhile calling out, because DevSecOps is a thing that didn't exist before 2015. No one knew what it was. DevOps was getting popular. So a lot of the conversations became around, hey, DevOps is great, but what are we doing about security? And it was primarily started by people who were trying to develop applications. So you would hear a lot of conversations about DevSecOps in the application security land, where it's a CI/CD pipeline being used to deploy an application. And DevSecOps is basically injecting security, and injecting in a good way, not in a bad way, injecting security into a CI/CD pipeline. So you are able to, say, do things like static code analysis, software composition analysis. And I'm happy to go into a bit more detail about what each of these are. But the whole premise of the DevSecOps engineer role is to introduce automation into how security is done while deploying applications into a production environment. Or I guess, say, for example, if I were to use a Facebook example, when Facebook would deliver an application or deliver a new feature, they have security checkpoints that happen automatically in between before it gets presented to all of us. That's what DevSecOps would be like, and that's where a DevSecOps engineer would be helping out in.
Yeah, so based on what you're saying, is the DevSecOps engineer basically paired with the DevOps team and doing that kind of software analysis? It's mainly focused around that?
Yeah, yes and no. So they're still part of the security team. However, what I've seen out in the wild west, I guess, for lack of a better word, is there are DevSecOps team within a security team, but there are also security folks who are integrated into a DevOps team. So there are both ways to look at it. And it's not always called a DevSecOps engineer. What I've found in certain mature organizations, they don't use the title DevSecOps engineer. They normally prefer to just call the person a security engineer who's involved with the team from the start, or starting off a project all the way up to them deploying the project into production. That's usually called a not cloud security. I should stop talking about cloud security. Security engineer, and their role is to find out how they can make sure the code that's being deployed is secure, is using the best practice when you're developing it. So that's when in a mature organization. In a, say, organization which may have a DevOps role by itself, but they're trying to figure out what kind of automation can they do, they normally go for the DevSecOps title and DevSecOps engineer. So if you ever see a job for DevSecOps engineer, you can be sure there's a DevOps team, and you can also be sure that they are separate to your security team. You're still part of the security team, but you're kind of, I don't want to say they're created in silos, but they definitely work together in terms of automating either by integrating into an existing CI/CD pipeline, or these are the people who would create a parallel pipeline to deploy application or at least a security into an application.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because when I think of an information security team, I think of more traditional corporate information security, watching the enterprise. And this one it's really focused around organizations that are doing software development, system development, and making sure that those pieces are really secure. So let me ask you, I mean, is it possible that a DevSecOps engineer is also using CDCI type approaches for managing information security solutions within the enterprise?
Yeah, yes, and you're right. And I think the primarily role for them is the requirements are being built by someone else, but they are the ones who are kind of focusing on, hey, how do we, like Gerald wants to integrate, say, some kind of a secure coding best practice into a CI/CD pipeline. How do we make that a reality? That's kind of like some of the main focus for them. Because if you ever, whoever is listening to this, if you guys search for DevSecOps, what you'll find is there is never a senior DevSecOps engineer role. There's always a DevSecOps engineer role, but I've never seen a senior DevSecOps engineer role, because I feel like at that point, the kind of company realizes, hey, we don't really need a senior DevSecOps, because there's no that level of maturity. At that point, you're already a security engineer or a senior security engineer, because you're doing, to what he said, you're doing a lot more broader things. You're not just focused on CI/CD pipeline. Maybe if you have multiple projects which are running on DevSecOps and you're managing all of them, maybe then, but I'm yet to hear one. So yeah, you're right. It is primarily focused on that.
Final question about just the job before we move on to the skills needed for the job. Is this job almost exclusively reserved for tech and big tech type companies?
If you do the software development, then yes. And that's when you kind of find, depending on the organization, they call that title DevSecOps engineer. Otherwise, what you also would find is a security engineer is also sometimes given a similar responsibility, but with a broader context. So yes, it's primarily for tech companies, like software development companies. But what I've also started seeing is adoption of it in enterprise, like your banks and stuff. I think Capital One speaks about it quite often. There are other enterprise companies that are talking about it. They don't call them DevSecOps engineers. They call them not cloud security. They call them security engineers.
Yeah. And I could certainly see large, Fortune 50 companies that have in-house developed solutions having that as well. But it definitely seems like it's reserved for that kind of tech space. So,
right.
Okay, so people are listening and they're like, okay, you know what, Ashish, this actually sounds pretty good. And I'm sure the money goes with it because big tech's got big pockets or deep pockets. So what kind of skills should someone have in order to be a DevSecOps engineer?
That's a good question. And I think I probably would say I see a lot of people who are already working in DevOps as the ones who are transitioning over to DevSecOps, because it's easier to teach a security skill to a person who knows automation already. Because the whole point of the bottom line is DevOps was built with the intention to automate the deployment of an application into production. And security folks, unfortunately, we are all taught this is how we secure stuff. We never taught automation in university or anywhere else. So what we find a lot of transition usually happens from people who are working in DevOps already. So if you are someone who probably has some experience in, say, automation in a DevOps pipeline, you're probably a great fit for it as a beginner, because you can totally go in and talk about how you can automate a pipeline, and the tooling that goes with it can be something that can be taught in the field. So that's something as a good starting point. If you're starting absolutely new and you haven't done any of this before, then I would still encourage you to kind of go down the DevOps path first, because what you realize is security is everywhere. It can be easily taught. It's things like the newer technologies, like we're talking about cloud, we're talking about DevOps, we're talking all these APIs now. Like, programs these days are quite complex. Like, it's not just as simple as I've got a server that I manage. Like, the questions that we are trying to answer as security people these days is, how do we get our heads around all these newer compute technologies, like your serverless containers, all these technologies, right? That's just one side of the problem. The other side is I need to find some automation. So what I find for people who are absolutely starting new, I would encourage you to kind of go down the DevOps path first, because what you realize, it gives you an understanding of how to do automation. Security is something that people like Gerald and myself and others are so happy to kind of teach other people, because the more people know about security, the better it is. But an easier skill to teach than, say, automation, just because there's a lot more programming involved. And programming not in the context you're building like a whole Java application, but programming in the context that you're scripting automation and you're working with tools and services which enable automation, which kind of which forces you to have a mindset of, how do I automate the fact that my questions, like the same way the ticker is going at the bottom, how do I automate that it keeps updating every 5 minutes? Like that kind of thinking. And how would you go down the path of finding an API that you can use to change the value, and how do you provide that value to that whatever that API call is. So that's kind of the thinking, and that usually comes from a DevOps role. That's
Yeah.
my recommendation.
Yeah, and I mean, we were talking about this before we hit go. This role, this DevSecOps engineer, I mean, besides it being new, it is really more of a mid tier kind of experienced professional role. I would say, you know, for entry level people, this could be a bit to, you know, bite off, a bit too much.
Yeah, 100%. I think because there's a lot more, and I think what you said is actually interesting as well, because being a role which is expected to do automation from day one, and you can totally learn security. I think that's an easier skill to learn. However, learning automation, that takes a lot more longer time, and there's a lot of context you would not be aware of if you were thrown straight into a DevSecOps job. Like especially about networking as well. Like you kind of have to understand how the different environments would rolling. So you would have to deploy an application into your dev environment, migrate to desk, migrate to production. Like that concept would not exist in your mind if you haven't done some kind of a DevOps role or some kind of a IT role before that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the way we're talking about it, it almost makes me think of the way security was to IT 20 years ago, where it was really the IT people who were the natural transitions into security. And nowadays it's matured to the point where you don't have to come from IT. With this one, it's just so new that it's almost unrealistic to expect someone not to have DevOps experience be able to secure a DevOps, you know, pipeline.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
I think, but I've seen. I don't want to discredit security people altogether. There have been people who have successfully learned automation nowadays because everyone's being forced into the world of Terraform automation, using AWS, using Azure. So
Yeah.
they are learning. But if I were to put, like, I mean, obviously, when you're looking for a job, you want to put where you want to go fishing where most of the fishes are. You don't want to go to a point where there's not many fishes. So from that perspective, I think that would definitely work if you actually have some kind of DevOps experience.
Yeah. So, okay, what's the best thing about the job? What's great about being a DevSecOps engineer?
I think the best part about and my experience in this. So I work as a CISO now, but I think when we were doing it, it hasn't really evolved that dramatically from since then. Is the best part about having automation is that you don't have to do the same job again ever, unless there's something wrong with your code. You don't have to do it again ever. Although the ROI seems to be more in terms of it's really great for the organization to come into a public talk and say, hey, we deploy into production 5 to 6 times a day. The only reason they can do that is either they're not doing security, so that's a very great reason they can do that. B, they're doing security, but it's all automated and it's all in their pipeline. Or there could be a C as well, where they have a result but they've ignored it. But that's the pro part is being able to enable an organization to have that ability to deploy and deliver software faster in a secure manner. I think that's the biggest pro. And if you're someone who loves automation, you would love this job, because the whole point is you find a problem like the ticker problem that we were talking about earlier, where it's a rolling ticker, change the name, and it's just something that annoys you, and you're probably like a lazy programmer or a lazy IT person like most of us, and you want to automate that. So you do it once and you don't have to think about it forever. So you move on to bigger and better problems. Yeah, that's probably the most high that a lot of people get from these kind of jobs.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. When you do automate something and it works, right? It's like when you compile code that works after struggling a few times. It's sensational. So, okay, not everything is rosy, right? So what's the downside? What sucks about this job?
Yeah, okay. So tooling at the moment still sucks. Like this field only came up in 2015, and tools, unfortunately, not all of them have matured at the rate that the DevOps teams have. Unfortunately, that's one side, and I can go into detail if you want about that. But tooling is one, specifically calling out static code analysis. That field is still feel like 20 plus years old. They haven't really dealt with automation well, but I've got a whole rant keynote about it. I'm going to not go into it this over here. The second bad thing about it is when you don't have the people or process that kind of the security culture of the organization, when that when that doesn't enable security, DevSecOps doesn't really play a role there. Like you may go to a DevOps team and talk about, hey, we want to automate security. I've learned on this skill. I want to put some security gate points or checkpoints, but it would still allow you to deploy into production really quickly. 9 or 10 times, what you find is people don't have the education or awareness of it. And that leads to you having a lot of friction with people never trying to integrate into the pipeline in the first place. So your role kind of is struggled by the fact that the team that you want to work with, they don't want to open their gates to you guys. And yeah, that's definitely the next the next con that people talk about, and at least we experience. The third con is people, even though DevSecOps engineer is all about automation, if you don't have someone to go through the results of the tooling and make that understanding clear to, say, a developer, you kind of lose the value of a security team in their organization. Say, for example, the idea is you do CI/CD pipeline, and I'm gonna throw stones at SAST again, so static code analysis, because I'm definitely starting to hate them. I want them to change, and I want them to be better. So you do that, you get 50,000 false positives, and you take that and send that as it is to a developer. They would hate you because they have so much more to do apart from working on security. Instead, if you have someone in your security team, like an application security person, or maybe you yourself have an understanding of it, you came from an application security background into DevSecOps, you are able to use that to go, okay, out of these 50,000, only 2 of them are worth looking at. I'm going to send the 2 to developers. They would be more than happy with doing that, because no one wants to have a really badly written, insecure code in production. But they also don't want to spend 50,000, spend time resolving 50,000 false positive into 2 false positive, because that's not their job. So that's the other con.
Yeah, absolutely. And like to your point, I was a software developer before I got into cyber, and if someone it's like blue collar work. Like you put your sweat and energy into building this code. For anyone to come and tell you that it's trash, you get your back up immediately. So it's confrontational before you even open the door. And if you're throwing false positives at them, you're going to lose some political capital pretty quickly.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So, what are the best ways to get the skills that you would need to be a DevSecOps engineer? And it does sound like you almost have to come from DevOps or AppSec. Anyways, but if those people are trying to make the migration into DevSecOps, what would you recommend that they do?
Sure. So if you are coming from a DevOps land, I probably would focus more on the kind of tooling that's used for security automation. And I think it's easy. So for example, even if you're in an organization where you may be doing a DevOps role already, but you haven't really done kind of security automation, there's a lot of open source tools that you can start integrating into your pipeline at any given day to start introducing that concept to your existing organization. Now, worthwhile calling out, if you are thinking of doing it on your own and you maybe don't have the support of a security team in your organization, I would start with software composition analysis. That's the easiest one to start with in terms of tooling, where you don't have to have, say, a lot of application security background. Because what that focuses on is it looks at the libraries being used by the software developer, and if those libraries are compromised or at least have a known vulnerability out in the wild, that's what that basically is around. So that's an easier start. It's an easier start even if you're a CISO like me and you're trying to find, hey, how do I start DevSecOps or automation of security in my organization? My recommendation is to them as well is to go for software composition analysis first. There's quite a few tooling out there, paid, some free. So have a look at those. But that's a great way to upskill yourself if you are coming from a DevOps background. It's kind of similar for the application security folks as well. But what I find as a bigger challenge over there is that they don't have the automation mindset. For them, it's more about, and I don't want to generalize it, but most scenarios come down to, I have a project that I work on. I found a lot of vulnerability or bugs. I need to find a way to kind of educate people about this. But automation is not something that is taught in that field traditionally. Kind of like what you were saying earlier, a lot of us started in IT, then migrate to IT security. For them, they started as software developers and migrate to how do I write amazing code? But it wasn't like, how do I write amazing code, but also check them in an automated fashion so I can deploy it 5 to 6 times? Like that's not a thing for them, or at least that wasn't a thing for them. So that's evolving. They're also realizing we need to do this in a better way. The folks who are going and learning automation and learning what kind of tooling is available from the cloud to build a CI/CD pipeline. So the deployment process from a development to a test or production is not a manual thing. It just goes automatically like a bang, bang, bang. I think that's kind of like the learning curve you would have to pick up if you are coming from an application security background.
Yeah. Is there any type of like labs or anything like, can you like, for people to play around? So I've heard of Ansible, I've heard of Terraform. I mean, is there like an AWS like lab or environment that you could spin up just for even a simple, infrastructure as a code, like, deploying VMs or something?
Yeah. I think so AWS has a lot of free labs. Azure, Google Cloud, all of them have labs that talk about deploying into, say, a CI/CD pipeline. So you can definitely learn that skill set. That's not there are labs for that, but what I find is, at least the ones that I haven't come across yet from a security perspective, on integrating security tooling inside those CI/CD pipelines. So it's easier to find training from the providers on automation, on how to build a CI/CD pipeline, or how to use a existing service from AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud for deploying into pipelines. Say, for example, if you're looking at AWS, I would look at services like AWS Code Build, AWS Code Pipeline. If you're looking at DevOps, if you're looking at Azure has something called Azure DevOps, something to look at. Like there's automation tools available. So it's been abstracted also to a point that you just need to be able to talk to an API, but again, automation. But from a DevSecOps and integrating a tool into a pipeline, because most of those tools are provided by vendors, they themselves have training available, which might be some free, but may not all be free. But what I find is 9 or 10 times they're talking about this in a very isolated way. And they might say focus on a service like Jenkins for automation. And that there's a lot more to the world than Jenkins. But Jenkins used to be a thing. I feel I haven't seen a Jenkins server for some time, but they still focus on that as an automation because that was the first software that people got introduced to. But there's a lot more to it. If you are looking for how do I get accustomed to these skills, first step would be identify, if you are in a cloud environment, identify what services you can use from that cloud provider to enable automation. Next step after that is, if you go to, say, OWASP, OWASP, Open Web Application Security, they're not protocol, they call it something else. There's OWASP.
Project? Is it project?
Yeah, I think it's probably, yes, project. Yeah. I'm trying to remember it. So OWASP has a lot of projects that they talk about security automation. They run a talk as well. So on the YouTube, check that out as well. And it's all focused on how to do automation. They definitely don't go into quite minute details of it, but that kind of gives you an architectural understanding of, oh, this is how I would do it if I were to inject security into a pipeline.
Yeah, it's definitely a paradigm shift. There's no question about it. It's unbelievably different, but it's awesome because it's fast and it's such an improvement over the traditional approach to software development. Yeah.
100%.
Okay, Ashish Rajan giving us the love on DevSecOps engineer. Ashish, where can people hear about you? I know you've got a great podcast. You're on LinkedIn. Where can people get more information if they've been loving your perspective and views?
Yeah, sure. No, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me. I really appreciate that. But by the way, for people who are fans of Gerald was a guest on the show as well. I'll definitely check out the YouTube channel of Cloud Security Podcast and check out Gerald's interview there as well. He did a great job with the SOC role. And I think if you're after, say, talking about cloud security, CISO, DevSecOps, you can always find me at the Cloud Security Podcast website, which is www.cloudsecuritypodcast.tv, or on our YouTube channel. We're on all social as well as podcasting platforms as well. So you can definitely reach out to us, one of those, and I'll be more than happy to help you. LinkedIn is just Ashish Rajan, as I pointed over there. But yeah, looking forward to connecting with everyone and provide value in any way I can.
Awesome. Thanks, Ashish.
No problem.
All right, so if you loved that, why don't you check out this video up here for everything you need to know about becoming a SOC analyst. And maybe if that's not your speed, you can check out this video right here on how to become a social engineer. All right, everybody, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.